These tools are better than ever. They're more accessible than ever. And if you can get your hands on these modernized tool sets and use them to also govern data better and integrate it better, you're doing two things. You're creating a more upskilled workforce, but you're actually creating risk minimization and better controls as a result of getting more people included than just somebody who's outside of the tax organization trying to understand where to grab that sales and use tax table. When they get that spark where they say, wow, like this took me 2 days and I saved a lot of time that now is going to happen every month for me in the closing process. That is the spark that sometimes you don't know the outcome or power of it to begin with, but when you have tens of thousands of people doing that, that is where the scaling occurs in a lot of large enterprises. And you have to make a bet that if you empower people and democratize these tools, there will be great outcomes. Team up. You know, the companies that do this the best don't look at one person as quote unquote owning all the data and understanding where all the outcomes would have to be and having all the technical talent to do all those things. The best companies look at this as teamwork.
Welcome to the new automation mindset where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. Today, we're very lucky to have with us Steve Brodrick. He's the founder of Horizon 5. And Steve has a really interesting journey. So previously, he was the Chief Transformation Officer at Alteryx. And before that, he actually was a finance leader at Stanley Black & Decker for 21 years, a long time. And before that, another 5 years in finance at United Technology. Lots of experience. And we also know Alex Barr, who's with you at Horizon 5. You know him well from his previous job using Workato in the finance organization over at DoorDash. So it looks like you're building a very impressive team.
Thank you.
Look, Steve, you have this long career as a finance leader, and then you turned towards technology. And also, when we talked before, you have that big passion for democratizing data. So tell us a little bit, how this came about. Tell us about your journey, and maybe also now with Horizon 5, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What's your mission for Horizon 5?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's great to meet with you, Markus. And in prep for today, we realized how much we have in common on how we, see things unfolding in the space and our background. So thrilled to be here. Yeah, I mean, it's a journey, right? So my background, as you mentioned, a large majority of it was over 20 years at Stanley Black & Decker. I was largely leading planning for the company and integrations or CFO for the operating units there. And in doing that, we were growing like a weed. Like we were $2 billion in revenue when I joined and roughly $18 billion when I left the company. And as part of that, we had a lot of data in the company and acquired a lot of companies, and the complexity grew. And when you're trying to extract insights or outcomes in a business unit, as a finance leader, sometimes the answer you get is, boy, if I just had my hands on that data, and if it was in usable form. So I kind of heard that long enough to say, hey, if there was a chance to raise my hand and partner with the IT organization, the CIO at Stanley was Rhonda, she's still there, that I wanted to do that because I saw a huge need and it was really difficult to do, but I had the opportunity to build a strategy around it and build a team around it. So we kind of dove into what we call performance resiliency, but it was really getting better access in data to the broader teams outside of the very small team that was impacting data to begin with, and then also using it to improve governance and improve decision making and empower people so that instead of them saying, if I just have my hands on the data, it was what tools can I get in my fingertips to actually work with technology, and get to outcomes faster and not spend so much time doing manual work, all the things that most people, when you ask them in any organization, aspire to. So that's what kind of led me to driving that program. And it was about upskilling people and it was about creating value sources in the company. And we realized that to get to value, we had a lot of different categories of value we talked about externally, but there was one common element across all of them, which was data. It was, how do we get our hands on better accessibility of data for decision makers? So I identified that early in the process, and we built teams that were using technology and self-service tools to help do that. And we found we create a lot of value, and the teams felt pretty empowered to do more. Lo and behold, Alteryx is one of those tools that was a foundation of everything we were doing at Stanley. And I, came to Alteryx a few years back to help other companies and leaders understand how they could build transformation programs around tools like Alteryx, but it also fits among a bunch of other things outside of Alteryx, right, in your tech stack. So now at Horizon 5, the tagline is data-driven, but people inspired, where, every company is really looking to dive into data and technology. Not many aren't, but it's a real skill set to understand how do these tools fit together to create value and also give people more avenues to do what they want to do better and faster and innovate quicker and, be better for the customer, et cetera, be better places to work. So that's really the objective for me now is, leveraging tools like Alteryx and other things at Horizon 5. How do we help teams create the avenues to do that, and communication mechanisms and technology and change management and recognition, all the things it takes to do this successfully in a large enterprise.
That's fascinating. I mean, it seems like really what you're capturing is like, data is the new oil in a way. This is the one thing that can really make everything better, and then it's extracting value from it. Like maybe the data is there, but people can't get to it. And then the other thing that, again, strikes me is the empowering. You said like data driven and people inspired, is that people really need to be part of that. That's really cool. So look, I want to draw the line here to kind of our world at Workato, and then we shared with you the book, the new automation mindset there from BJ, our CEO. It highlights the process, the innovation, and the scale mindset. And by the way, the scale is not like technical scale; it's really people scale. So I think there's quite a bit of similarity. Like, what's your reaction when you saw the book, when you maybe read a little bit into the book? Like, how does it relate to your world?
Well, I'm sending it to others, so that tells you something about what I think about it. It touches on things that are really important to me. You just mentioned the business process side. I think there's a misconception in a lot of companies or with a lot of leaders that we've got the tech, so why aren't we seeing outcomes? Right. And the next question to ask usually is, how are you running your people processes alongside your technology effectively? What are the communication mechanisms? How are you driving collaboration? Is it a small team trying to do the work of thousands, or is it taking and putting tools in people's hands that are closest to the data, that probably know where the gold is in an organization, right? So what I liked about that process element is it's tech and people. So that's something that resonates with me and kind of why I do what I do. The automation side, you and I talked about this last week, Markus. I think a lot of people fast forward right to RPA, and it's a key part of just about any organization. There's not many I go into that aren't leveraging it. But you also have an opportunity to redefine business process and truly innovate how work is done in an organization. And I've seen some really, really complex stuff that leverages RPA tools, but also other mechanisms that help integrate data together to really get to better decisions. Or if you're in a large bank, how do you minimize risk? How do you identify sources of value with data? So I think that automation piece is a really core element, and it's a balance between RPA and other things. And then the scale, and we talked about this one too last week, it's just, if you have a few people in a pocket in your organization who are doing great things with data, it's a good thing, but you won't come up an accelerated curve of value creation. It's just nearly impossible. And when you think about culture, it's driven by people at the end of the day. So more people that you have empowered with tools, you're able to really get to more than just defining a few outcomes, but you're getting people on board with how they can come to work and do their best every day. And companies that do that really well are the leaders who are growing, they're places where people want to work. So, we could talk ad nauseum about scale, but it's really misunderstood in a lot of companies how you do it. So I love getting into enterprises understanding where they're at in that maturity and helping them get to high maturity is, partly how you think about how you scale with tech and tools and people.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about this, because it just came to me, because my background, my first job out of college was process reengineering. So not from a data perspective, I was a consultant. I wasn't on the IT side at all. It was really about requirements. It wasn't like specific to a domain. I was actually specific to an industry, like technology and telco and that kind of stuff. But I always kept complaining that people don't get processed that well. And I was always in a way like jealous, like, they always talked about data and getting the data. And I felt like, well, they understand databases, but they don't understand like, the workflows, the processes. But it now, talking to you, it kind of comes to me that, maybe it's because the data wasn't accessible even like you mentioned RPA, right? RPA is a expression of process. You're following the steps of what people do in the applications, but in RPA, it's kind of really hard to bring in a data element, in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, because you can go and you can basically do your screen scraping and what happens on the screens, but you can't go to the database and then do a query in RPA. I mean, that's really not what it's supposed to do. So a data-driven process becomes actually hard to do in RPA. I don't know what your take is on that. Did you ever run into that issue?
It is hard, actually. Back to my Stanley Black & Decker days, we had a APO team, we call it, about automation and process optimization. So we had RPA tools, but other self-service tools like Alteryx, Power BI, Tableau, Click, other things at play. And the one thing I learned is, not many people come to work thinking, how do I do this worse? You have to assume positive intent, where people want to come and do a better job, or they want to do something faster for whoever they're working for, or they want to get to better decisions. The most unmet need is what you said earlier, Markus. It's accessibility. It's many organizations. There's some work that International Institute for Analytics came out with, I think it was about 2 years ago, that suggests the top, few hundred companies that they surveyed, all the largest companies in the world, they'll tell you that between 1% and 2% of their workforce feel they're empowered with tools to be successful. In my humble opinion, if you think about the next 5 to 10 years in any enterprise, maybe the biggest unlock on the planet that's about to occur is if you're in an organization, you can take that 2% of people who really feel like, hey, I come in and I have the tools to be successful, to work with a lot of data and integrate and drive better decisions, from 2 to 5 to 20 to 50%. Companies that do that, it's like inspiring going in their 4 walls, right, Markus? Like there is a pathway to do that, but you find this illumination that occurs where people have to understand that these tools are better than ever. They're more accessible than ever. And if you can get your hands on, Tableau, Alteryx, Workato, like these modernized tool sets, and use them to also govern data better and integrate it better, you're doing 2 things. You're creating a more upskilled workforce, but you're actually creating risk minimization and better controls as a result of getting more people included than just somebody who's outside of the tax organization trying to understand where to grab that sales and use tax table, right? It's better sometimes to get the sales and use tax person involved, and that usually leads to a more swift outcome, right, where people are right at the point of impact. So I'm probably biased, having spent more than a couple of years at Alteryx across 400 plus companies, but I can say that unlock it's more about how for executives I talk to and leaders than if. So it's just a question of, what things can you do to drive RPA automation, integration more successfully and get it in the hands of more people so that you can really get the most out of your workforce and you can be a place people want to work. If people are walking into an environment that's all manual, it's probably a matter of time between when they decide to leave. But if you can invest in your people, they are your number one asset. So if they're empowered, you can bet your value is going to be there. So I think there's some learnings in there for me, not just leading a transformation or a few of them in my past, but seeing how this plays out in other companies. And those are some of the common themes that I think all resonate around accessibility. To your point, it really does.
So let's talk about this unlock, right? So the big story behind Workato and why we started Workato, we had Vijay, myself, we all have a career in integration tools. And if you want to go into like really kind of the world before scale, I mean, you got to see some of these old integration tools. I mean, it's basically down to the fact that, maybe, if you're lucky, like 3 people in the company can use that. They're deep in IT. Is it like you take a tool like a TipGo, like an old integration tool? It's not even the entire IT organization can use it. There's like really specialists. It's down to the point where if you don't do TipGo all day long, forget it. It's not going to happen. So some of the Workato thinking was just going like little baby step and saying like, hey, application administrators, like the people who do like your SAP finance or Oracle Fusion finance or whatever, like why can't they do some of these connections, right? Because, it really wasn't possible back then. Now you're coming from being a finance operator, a controller kind of in a way, and you're moving your way towards technology, but you're still on the business side in a way. I'm actually really curious about that intersection, that interface between line of business and IT. Like in your perspective, like what have you seen there at Black & Decker? Like how did that work? Also like given that you're now working, at Alteryx and now at your new company, like you're working with more organizations. What are you seeing there? Like where do you think people are in that regard today? Like on a maturity scale, like how would you rank them today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It made me think when you asked that of, if you think about all of our roles 10 years ago and you ask the question, who are the data professionals? Like, what do you think of? I know what I think of. I think of the IT organization, right? If I had a need and something involved data, and then you go right to IT and it goes in a ServiceNow trouble ticket process. And, there's a whole process that ensues after that, but it's sometimes difficult to achieve that with speed. If you step back from that, the reason is that a lot of the technical people that are the best able to get at the data, they don't know where the problem exists within the data or the outcome that is the most relevant to somebody who's making a decision. So to me, the major element in what you just discussed is that data professionals are not just in IT, they're certainly there, but also others across every function. Data really knows no function. It sits in your marketing organization, your HR organization, it sits everywhere. So to me, you have to develop a strategy when you're transforming where you have an integrated way to welcome everybody to the data dance. That's what inspires me. When I go into a company and we talk about what they want to achieve for goals, it's pretty clear if you have 4 or 5 people who think they have all the outcomes that they're looking to drive and they have the solutioning aspects, that doesn't work. There's some Harvard business case studies and a lot of proof points that doesn't work really well. If you have technical people who want to work together with non-technical, let's say, people that don't have a data science, data engineering degree, and they want to use their skill sets, but also link up with people in functional areas or in business units that know where the biggest challenges are they're facing, that is a super powerful thing. But it takes, if you're the CIO, the CFO, the CTO, the head of analytics, you have to have a strategy that says, hey, it's all about democratizing data and providing freedom in some type of framework. It's not everybody runs wild with data and we have a lot more risk than we had yesterday. It's how do we latch on to tools that help us better integrate data, but also do it in a way where it's pointed toward the solution set that the B or function needs the most. So how do you do that? You prioritize by getting your data teams or IT or professionals right alongside your business unit professionals. And I saw that firsthand at Stanley Black & Decker. When we got that group together, it was a really powerful thing, and it created a lot of value. And It was more about working together toward outcomes than, oh, I own this in the finance organization, or I own this in the IT organization, or, it was that collaboration that becomes really important. So where I see companies, to your second question around maturity, there are a lot of companies, I would say most modern enterprises are trying to figure this out. First of all, 4 or 5 years ago used to be, should we really dive into AI or other things? And now that's crossed, into mainstream. But there are a few things, that I think are really relevant. One is, what's the community that's developing, and is it integrated across those areas? Or is it siloed in certain areas where there's small groups trying to do the work of many? The second thing is, what are the collaboration mechanisms that occur? So if there are people doing great work in pockets, but they're not educating others and amplifying successes, then you get progress, but you don't get scale progress. And a lot of companies are looking to drive culture and scale. They'll get tools in people's hands, but they won't create avenues of accountability around showcases and hackathons and, leader staff calls where you're talking about the best outcomes and data, the tools that are being used to do that successfully. So it's amplifying successes and having mechanisms to do that I find I can offer a lot of coaching to companies on how to actually do that successfully. And you can integrate recognition programs, is a really key one. You can tie it to promotional activity. Some of the companies that are scaling to high levels of analytics maturity are also doing rotational programs where they deploy it into a large amount of people's hands, but they have people work in more data and tech-centered roles that then go right out to a business unit or functional area. And then they create these people who have more of a blended skill set of tech and function, which are super valuable, I think, in most organizations. So it's all on a scale, right? But I think the main thing is, if I go into a company that's a very low maturity, but they have the aspiration, it's really about community and collaboration points and amplifying successes, and of course the right tech stack. Some really modern enterprises I go into who are already scaling, it's a matter of how do they do this sustainably and create a drumbeat of activity where those people that are in and using these tools talk with each other. And there's nothing more powerful than that to really get this to take off in an organization and get to high maturity scale. So those are some of my observations. I would say every company is maturing. It doesn't matter your jump off point where you start now. Are these the common themes that you're addressing to kind of help you? And they are across tech, data, and process, right? Those are the things that we started with.
I'm really curious what you would say to people who are maybe low on the maturity. So I'll give you an example. So look, Workado, with that democratization of process, if you want, that's kind of what we were after. You go to Israel, for example, we got almost 200 customers in Tel Aviv alone, which is crazy if you think about it. This is like 3/4 of Los Angeles, right? So this is a small place. 200 customers. The culture, that Israeli culture, that seems to really adopt to it, and the collaboration across multiple people, it seems to work. I think also kind of people seem to be less hierarchical. I think the bottom up motion, that people just take responsibility and do something, that seems to be ingrained in the culture. Now, I grew up in Germany. Okay, you might get where this is going, but so in Germany it's very different story. It's almost the opposite. And so now I talk about democratization of this kind of stuff, and they go whoa, Markus, wait a second, this worked for decades, right? It's the IT people would say what are you talking about? They ask us, and then in a formal process, and they give their request, and it's all written up, and this is well organized. We don't want chaos and that kind of free form collaboration. And then actually the funny thing is business people on the other side, they would have back in Germany the same kind of rejection mechanism. They would go well, now you want us to do more than we're already doing. It's I thought they'll take care of that for us in IT. It's I don't want extra work. I'm just curious, have you heard that before? Or how would you get people to actually see the light in a way that this is actually making things better if they're ingrained in that old way?
I got a lot of thoughts on this one, Markus, but I'll try to be succinct. It's a question I get asked every week for sure. So let's say you're low maturity. I think number one is, who's determining the problem to solve? I think sometimes companies skip that. But do you have a group of 20 people who are trying to solve for the other 20,000? A, they can't do it. And B, why? Why don't you embrace how the ideas in an organization, where so many people are working through data, how do you get that to be a wider group of folks who all have challenges or opportunities they see? So that's one thing I always look for is who's determining the outcome you're looking for, the problem. And the best enterprises who are really scaling up realize that that's not in one group. That is across an organization. So one thing I always recommend is tying your total company goals to something like a digital effort or like a data analytics or automation effort, in that instead of one functional leader thinking that this is theirs and they're solving it all, it is a team sport. You and I talked about that last week. Like, this is absolutely a team sport. So if you can open the aperture wider in the organization, a lot of companies struggle with just that. And that's one thing I tried to do when I led, a big transformation is it wasn't one function. I came out of finance, but we were doing as much work in supply chain and, pricing as we were in finance, right? And accounting and the closing process and all that. So we were looking at different avenues. Probably the second thing is if you're low maturity, you have to recognize that in the data and analytics space and automation space, it's more about discovery than knowing up front, geez, if I give somebody a license to Workato or Alteryx or Power BI, I need to know up front what they're going to accomplish. What you need to know up front is, start with a goal where they struggle with manual work or lack of automation or lack of insight, and allow people to go find the solutions. And the good thing about technology these days is it doesn't take them long. The training is fairly quick. They get up and running their first workflows in days, usually, and then they start getting what I call the spark. If you can get, not make it too cumbersome for somebody to crawl on this journey, whatever tool it is, when they get that spark where they say, wow, like this took me 2 days and I saved a lot of time that now is going to happen every month for me in the closing process. Or, name the, if it's outside of finance, name the effort you're doing on a repetitive basis. That is the spark that sometimes you don't know the outcome or power of it to begin with, but when you have tens of thousands of people doing that, that is where the scaling occurs in a lot of large enterprises. And it takes kind of a bet. If you're a leader and you're on a digital path and you have investment dollars to put into it, then you have to make a bet that if you empower people and democratize these tools, there will be great outcomes. And the other thing I would say is you've got to, give the tools out and go down this path and encourage people down the path, but also hold them accountable. If you're a leader who is engaging in, getting self-service tools, say, out to a wider audience, that's a good thing. But then having an outcome where you're doing an event or showcase or recognizing people who are doing the best work, there are methods there that help low mature companies really get to medium or high maturity just by virtue of amplifying what people are already doing, or awareness of people who are in and using it that describe to others, hey, this wasn't all that hard. Because a lot of people are stuck because they did an ERP implementation that took 2 years, or they put a planning tool in that took 9 months to figure out. They're kind of stuck where I may not want to learn something because it's going to take me forever. Well, with the way technology is advanced, leaders have to figure out that, hey, this actually is something that is an advantage for people who are really interested in it now, because the tools are really pretty solid, and then make a bet on that. So I think between discovery and amplifying those successes, those are things that tend to drive better outcomes as you're kind of climbing up that early maturity curve.
Mm. It's really fascinating to kind of think about the psychology behind all of that. But I think you're totally right. I mean, look, what we saw at Workato in the early days was just these bottlenecks that people had integrations. And again, I mean, this was all within IT, mind you, right? So we saw that people needed to do things, but because so few people could actually use the tools, there were huge bottlenecks. And they couldn't be unwinded, and everyone was unhappy because it took so long and wasn't meeting expectations. But I guess what you're making me think is that, well, that bottleneck, that isn't just in IT. That bottleneck is at a bigger level, almost. Like, if I don't get the people on the business side who are kind of coming up with the requirements, if they're stuck in a bottleneck as well, then you got bottlenecks on both ends. You got two bottlenecks in two silos, and that sounds terrible.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, like, haven't we all been through processes where it's like, hey, how do we get to better insight? Well, let's have the business spend 4 days figuring out how to put together a request that gets kicked over to somebody more technical nature who doesn't really understand the problem they're trying to solve to begin with. And then whatever they get back is maybe not what they desired first. And there's another back and forth. And a lot of companies, people give up if that's the case. Mm-hmm. And if you can encourage people to think big, start small, and then just act fast, like, require them to think about, hey, here's a problem I know I got to get after. There's a lot of, let's say, manual work. Let me start with 2 or 3 things that drive me nuts and use these modern tool sets to help me, and then act and get 1 or 2 things done. That is what you need to happen in an organization to get this kind of flywheel occurring where people are seeing that it is approachable, to your point. It is something that, non-technical people can do, and help, drive advantages from. So I think that's a way to encourage a wider group to dive in. And it takes a little bit, like I said earlier, but when companies do that and they latch on to data as an avenue to really create value and upskill, they make massive progress. It scales from there.
It seems also like that the one thing that in the old world is really not paid attention enough to is learning. I mean, you mentioned, like, you're probably not going to get it right the first time. And so it seems like all the old way of thinking is almost assumes that you do get it right the first time, which is just false. And so if you want to maximize learning, you have to democratize in a way. Otherwise, you're just learning among 3 people in a silo, and that's very suboptimal in a way. I mean, it seems like that I do think is and then you're doing all these like big IT projects. Again, you're doing one huge ERP transformation and then wait another 10 years and then do another one, each time assuming that you just get it right the first time, which is just not going to happen. Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn. Look, I'm actually really curious. So I think we both believe in the potential of the same thing, that democratizing process, democratizing data, also bringing together business and IT to kind of collaborate around that is just really, really important. But I'd be curious, now we have this GenAI, the whole LLMs and all of that. And, some people might come and say like, well, Markus, now with GenAI, we do get it right the first time because it's so smart and it can't do everything. We don't even need the people anymore. How do you address what you've seen there? I mean, how do you see GenAI being a part of this democratization of data, or kind of the kind of finance organization also? Do you see, I was at this Gartner conference just recently, and everyone said that, the clean data is key to making the GenAI also really work. I don't know, the topic of GenAI in everything we talked about this was, what do you see there? Where's this going to go?
Well, I would start with, I think GenAI is really important. I think it's, you have to be the ostrich here where you're burying the head in the sand, or you have to say, there's something that is pretty powerful in a lot of cases. If you're doing anything from legal contracts to scheduling a vacation, if you're not using it, you're sub-optimized, right? And there's a lot of business circumstances where it's valuable. My personal view is generative AI does a lot of good things, but maybe one of the best things is it connects humans to technology in a different way than we've ever seen before. So the ability to go in and prompt, is something that maybe before that approachability wasn't quite there because somebody wasn't sure even how to go across and figure out how a solution could be derived. But if you can ask, how do I approach this, and then you get an answer back, it's something that can really pay dividends quickly. I also would say, though, with how important it is part of a broader ecosystem of, let's say, intelligence more broadly. So there's artificial intelligence, and then there's generative AI. Those are similar but different things. There's also intelligence that'll never go away, in that if you, to your point on using modernized tools to drive better integration of data and quality of data and things of that nature, well, we are now in an era where maybe now more than ever that's amplified, because if you're having generative AI go into look at an information set and derive conclusions, what happens if that data is not accurate, or if it's in 16 different file types on a server? It doesn't come back really well, right? So there's this rush toward data quality that I think is a good thing, because that would drive better use of tools like generative and other AI mechanisms. So to me, it's important, but it has to be one part of a strategy alongside other things that help really drive transformation. And it's all about you've got to have a human in the loop at some point who uses tools like generative that can get to better decision making. And some of the more complex ones that I've seen organizations go through, they're using generative, they're using AI, they're using data scrubbing tools, they're using integration platforms, analytics platforms. But at the end of the day, these things are pretty complicated. So there is a skill set in there that's less about the tech and more about how do I interpret this for how the business moves forward. So that's just some of my observations about it. I think it's an important element that you just can't avoid, and you have to figure out how you can use it in your organization, wherever you are, whatever industry it applies to all. But you have to do other things right alongside it to really get to leveraging, I'll say, more broadly, intelligence across your organization, right?
No, that makes total sense. Listen, this was fascinating. I'm just curious, like
yeah,
maybe as a last question here, like so I'm thinking again of this intersection between IT and the business, and working better together, democratizing across these borders. If there was one thing that you would give as a piece of advice to each side, think about, so the biggest audience here on this podcast is IT leaders. The one thing IT leaders can do to move to a more democratized data world, and then maybe think of your old role as a controller of finance people, like one thing that they can do to move to a more democratized world. What would these two things be?
Maybe the answer for both finance and IT functions is the same. Team up. The companies that do this the best don't look at one person as quote unquote owning all the data and understanding where all the outcomes have to be and having all the technical talent to do all those things. The best companies look at this as teamwork, because data is everywhere in your organization, right? So take your technical people, the people who understand how to build the right infrastructure and cloud environment, alongside your people who are using other integration tools and analytics tools and automation tools, get them talking, and allow that discovery to occur is something that I think is the companies that are advancing the fastest or have the best outcomes are driving are doing those things. If I can add a second one though, we didn't talk about this much, but whether you're an IT leader or a finance leader, like just having an understanding that return on investment can take many different shapes. It's often not that right up front, okay, if I give people this tool set, then I'm going to drive X value. How do you assign that to cloud or ERP? You get a different answer from every company you talk to, right? So when you talk about self-service tools, it's the same thing, where you have to make a bet that this is going to drive value because of the amount of people that you're empowering to go do, make decisions better. But it can enhance revenue. It can take cost out. You can minimize risk, and increase compliance. You can drive efficiencies, So there are numerical elements in that. But there's also, qualitative elements of that, and like empowering your teams more to be successful. And at the end of the day, to me, whether you're an IT leader or finance leader, if you are empowering people with better tools to help them modernize their skills, they're going to create valued outcomes. They're going to make better decisions, and ultimately that's going to support your customers, your organization. Your people are going to be happier working in the organization, all those things. So I think taking a broader lens toward what's the return I'm getting here is super important. A lot of efforts on transformation don't get off the ground because people want answers up front, or they see it as just one of those levers. And really, it's all of them. And if you talk to companies that are really doing great things in data analytics automation, they're looking at this more broadly. So there's many different ways to measure success. So how do you think about that mix for you as a leader? I think often helps executives and leaders think through that in a different way.
This is really interesting. Maybe just to add to this, like I can totally see how doing an ROI model on this kind of democratization of data can be really challenging, because I do think it kind of makes me think that, I think we said that the old world is kind of focused on trying to get a result immediately, like in one shot. It feels to me like this is the problem of the ROI model also, because, how do you quantify the value of discovery? How do you quantify the value of learning? It seems like most ROI models just don't have that actually in them. Or maybe we just have a really hard time putting a value stamp on, what learning together can actually get you to. Does that make sense? I mean,
yeah, and there are ways to do that. Like, there are, back to my Stanley Black & Decker days, we tracked at a pretty finite level, better insights that led to better decisions on pricing, margin, inventory, and without tools to integrate the data better or give us better visibility, good luck driving better procurement in your organization. It's nearly impossible to do. The other thing is, you made me think about this when you said that. Data in the world is doubling roughly every 2 years. So you have a choice to do nothing in investing in data and technology and tools like we've talked about, or saying, you know what? If data is going to double, it's pretty damn important to my organization, right? So how do I unlock that? And is it in 20 people that sit in one place in a 20,000 person organization, or is it thinking about how I can scale something across the organization that makes better decisions everywhere? I mean, the answer is so obvious, right? So you have to, think about return on investment, not only, with decision making, but also with that, empowering people. That really is what makes decisions and outcomes. So, how do you cater to their needs? And they're dealing with more complexity than yesterday in every organization, right? Think about the amount of data you and I take in our personal lives before we even start work in a day, right? And that's the same for people who are professionals. So if you address that and look at it as an opportunity and invest in that, that is how you really help people, but also help drive outcomes for your customers or your organization. So, I'm very passionate about that. And that's part of, why I do what I do, is help companies understand that it's a balance between empowering people and driving value. And, that can lead to really positive outcomes when you think about it that way.
No, perfect. Look, I'll end with your slogan, because I really like it a lot. Data driven and people inspired. The more and more I think about this, is really this could be a slogan for Workato just as well, because I think I do believe, compared to like RPA, which is the very robotic kind of thing, is like, Workato recipes, they can bring in the data. They can be data driven, where RPA actually has a really hard time. And then people inspired, I think, this was always the reason why we started Workato, to get it to more people and to break through that IT business barrier. So yeah, data driven, people inspired. I think that's, I hope we're going to do a lot more good work together in that regard.
I look forward to it. I've enjoyed the discussion, and we could talk these topics at much longer length, but hopefully some of this was insightful for people who are listening in. And it was great to get time with you, thinking about your perspectives leading up to today too. And we're both learners in the space. You learn as you build teams around this, and you figure out what that mix of technologies are that help you be successful. So It was good hearing your perspectives too, Markus, and look forward to working with you more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.